Frost on the windshield, a boy's breath fogging the glass. Caleb Whitfield counted crumpled bills on the dashboard of a 15-year-old pickup, lips moving silently. Behind him, an auction lot stretched into the gray Virginia morning, rows of apple trees, bare and twisted, bark peeling like old paint. Their roots were wrapped in burlap sacks gone stiff with mud. A auctioneer's gavel cracked. Nobody bid. Caleb raised his hand. The crowd turned. An old farmer spat into the dirt and laughed low in his throat. 50 dying trees, sold to a 17-year-old boy for $1,100 he didn't have. Nobody asked why. Not the auctioneer counting his cash twice. Not the men in canvas coats murmuring behind gloved hands. Caleb just signed the paper, folded it into his coat pocket, and backed his trailer toward the withered rows. Wind cut sideways through Rockbridge County that morning, rattling dead branches like bones. He touched one trunk, ran his thumb along a scar in the bark, and something in his face changed, not doubt, not regret. Something closer to certainty. Whatever he saw in those 50 dying trees, he wasn't telling anyone. Not yet. Not until harvest. Before we get into how far this went, stranger than anyone in that county could have guessed, hit subscribe so you don't miss where this leads. And drop a comment telling us what town or state you're watching from tonight. Now, back to Rockbridge County. Rockbridge County sits where the Blue Ridge folds into the Shenandoah Valley, a place of limestone fences and slow rivers, where families had farmed the same red clay for 5 generations. The Whitfield place was 40 acres of it, mortgaged twice over. Caleb's father, Everett, had broken his back 2 winters back when a hay baler tipped in the mud, and the medical bills stacked up faster than the firewood. His mother, Ruth, kept the books at the kitchen table by lamplight, her pencil hovering over numbers that never balanced. The bank in Lexington had already sent 2 letters. A third was coming. Everett Whitfield sat in his wheelchair on the porch most afternoons, watching frost creep across the fields he could no longer walk. He hadn't asked Caleb where the boy got that auction money, birthday savings, mowing jobs, 2 summers of fence work for the Hargrove place down the road. He hadn't asked, because some part of him already feared the answer wouldn't matter. The bank didn't care about apple trees. The bank cared about the balance due by the first frost of November. And November that year was coming on fast, cold, and without any mercy at all. Word travels quiet in a small county, and by Sunday, half of Rockbridge had heard about the Whitfield boy and his 50 dead trees. At the feed store, men leaned on the counter and shook their heads. That family needed seed money, not firewood, said Roy Pickens, who ran the co-op and held paper on half the farms in the valley. Ruth Whitfield heard it secondhand at church, felt her cheeks burn, and said nothing. She trusted her son the way a tired woman trusts a lamp in a storm, not because she could see the road ahead, but because the dark demanded she trust something. Caleb worked before school and after, hauling water in 5-gallon buckets down the frozen slope behind the barn, wrapping each trunk's roots in fresh mulch and burlap against the cold. He'd read everything he could find at the county library about heirloom apple varieties, pages photocopied from an agricultural extension pamphlet, dog-eared and soft from handling. He never told his father what the pamphlet said. Not the words Harrison apple. Not the words nearly extinct. Not the words that had made his hands shake the first time he read them, alone, in the fluorescent hush of the library after hours. His best friend, Dale Osner, found him out there one gray afternoon, breath clouding, boots sinking in the mud. "Caleb, you know what folks are saying," Dale said, kicking at a fence post. "They're saying you bought a lot of firewood for $1,100. Caleb kept wrapping burlap, didn't look up. "These aren't dying, Dale. They're dormant. There's a difference." Dale squinted at the gnarled, leafless rows, unconvinced. "Looks the same to me." Caleb almost told him then the truth he'd been carrying since the auction, heavy and bright as a coal in his coat pocket. Instead, he just kept working. The bank's third letter arrived on a Tuesday, and this one had a date circled in red ink. 90 days. Ruth read it twice at the kitchen table, then folded it small, the way you fold something you can't bear to look at whole. Everett wheeled himself to the window and stared out at his son working the orchard slope in the fading light. and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something close to anger, not at Caleb, but at a world that let a boy carry weight no boy should have to carry, alone in the cold. Caleb pressed on through January's ice storms, wrapping every trunk twice over, hauling straw mulch by the wheelbarrow load until his palms cracked and bled in the cold. He wrote letters, 2, 3 of them, mailed quietly from the post office in Lexington, addressed to an old cidery in Charlottesville that specialized in what the letters called heritage varietals. He didn't mention the letters to anyone. Not to Dale, not to Ruth, not even to his father. If he was wrong, he told himself, better to be wrong alone. 90 days had become 60. The trees, impossibly, had begun to bud. By April, small green buds had broken across all 50 trees, a fact that spread through the county faster than the frost letters ever had. Roy Pickens drove out himself, parked his truck at the fence line, and stood there a long while, saying nothing. Didn't think they'd leaf out, he finally admitted. Caleb just nodded, watching bees move slow and drunk through the blossoms. He still hadn't told anyone what he'd found in that agricultural pamphlet, or what a man from Charlottesville had said on the phone 2 nights before, his voice tight with something like disbelief, something like hope. The bank's deadline arrived in early October, the same week the orchard came into full harvest. Ruth stood at the edge of the trees with a basket on her hip and reached up to pull down an apple unlike any she'd ever grown, small, russet, oddly shaped, faintly spiced when she broke the skin with her thumbnail. She didn't know what she was holding. She only knew her son had asked her, quietly, 3 days before to trust him one more time. So she picked, and by noon, the barn floor was covered in bushels of strange, beautiful fruit. That was the morning the truck from Charlottesville came up the gravel drive, not a rusted farm truck, but a clean white one with a cidery's name painted on the door. The man who stepped out, an orchardist named Thomas Prout, walked the rows slowly, lifting branches, turning apples over in his palm like a man handling old coins. Then he said the words Caleb had been waiting all winter to hear out loud. Harrison apples, near-extinct varietal, presumed lost to America for over a century. Roy Pickens, standing at the fence, went pale and silent. Prout explained it right there in the yard, apple in hand, while the whole family and half the county, it seemed, stood listening. The Harrison apple had vanished from American orchards after Prohibition gutted the cider trade. Its last known trees lost sometime in the 1970s, presumed extinct, until a handful of rediscovered specimens turned up decades later, worth more per bushel than any apple in the valley. 50 trees of it, healthy and bearing, was something no cidery in Virginia had seen in a generation. Prout offered a contract on the spot. Enough. Ruth would later calculate at the kitchen table, hands shaking, to clear the mortgage twice over. Word moved through Rockbridge County that same afternoon, the way fire moves through dry grass. Men who'd laughed at the auction drove out just to see the trees for themselves, hats in hand, saying little. Roy Pickens stood at the fence a long while, then walked over and shook Caleb's hand without a word, which from a man like Roy meant more than any apology could. Everett Whitfield wheeled himself down the porch ramp for the first time in months. Out to the orchard his son had built from nothing but a library pamphlet and $1,100 of quiet faith. The Whitfield farm kept its land that winter, and the orchard bore fruit every autumn after, its rows no longer strange to anyone in Rockbridge County. Caleb never made much noise about what he'd done. He just kept working, same as always, boots in the mud before sunrise. Sometimes wisdom doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it looks like foolishness, standing quiet in a frozen field, waiting for spring to prove it right. And sometimes the ones who laugh loudest are simply the ones who never learned to look twice. In Rockbridge County, they still tell it this way. The boy didn't buy 50 dying trees. He bought 50 second chances and had faith enough to wait for spring.